A strong argument could be made that the Starks are the protagonists of A Song of Ice and Fire, and as the protagonists, of course, they have these gifts that make them special. If you'd only seen the show, you might be surprised to learn that they have these magical abilities to skin change animals. In the show, of course, Bran does that, but it's not really focused on whatsoever because David and Dan didn't really want to delve into the magical parts of the series. But in the text, George R. R. Martin has confirmed that all six Stark children, Jon included, are skin changers, are wargs, and we see that play out through the series as a whole. I did a video this past weekend theorizing about Benjen Stark being a warg, and a larger idea with that. Go watch that if you haven't seen it after this video, of course. But one question I got in response to that theory is, if the Starks are skin changers at this point in the story generally, why doesn't our first main Stark viewpoint exhibit this same gift? Why isn't Ned Stark a skin changer? If the Starks are the protagonists of Ice and Fire, then Ned Stark is the protagonist's protagonist, as he is the main character of the first book in the series, though he does end up in sort of this dead mentor Uncle Ben role for the rest of the series writ large. But those comments I got on that video are correct. Ned Stark has 15 chapters in Game of Thrones, the most any character does in the entire series, though those chapters are a fair bit shorter than the chapters that we have in, like, A Dance with Dragons, but I digress. And in those 15 chapters, we see no evidence of Ned Stark being able to slip his skin and take on the mind and faculties of an animal, controlling it telepathically as his children seem to be able to do. There is pretty direct evidence that all of the new generation of Starks hold this ability, which is quite interesting given the fact that Jon Snow is not Ned Stark's child. He is, of course, the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen. That's what makes me think it is a larger connected thing to the Starks, as it could theoretically come from Catelyn's bloodline, this prior Went heritage that had controlled Harrenhal, and were maybe these kind of bat lords. There is some interesting theorization going on there, but the fact that Jon also shares this ability and seems to be the second most powerful warg other than Bran, it is interesting to explore what it might be in the Stark bloodline that defines this ability and why Ned Stark may lack it. It is worth noting the occurrences of this practice in the main series. Jon obviously wargs Ghost, Arya wargs Nymeria in her dreams from a continent away, and beyond that, when she's blinded by the Faceless Men, she's able to control cats and use them as her eyes and ears rather than her own faculties. Sansa is less directly able to use this ability. Her direwolf was killed very early on in the story, but there was a comment on my last video that pointed out that she does seem to use skin-changing abilities in A Feast for Crows via looking through a bird's eyes at the singer Marillion in the sky cells of the Eyrie. And additionally, while Bran is our most obvious case of this, warring ravens and his direwolf and Hodor, there are also two Starks who aren't viewpoints, Robb and Rickon, who do still seem to have very strong connections with their direwolves, and Martin has directly said that all of this generation of Starks are skin changers. The first element to consider is the fact that all of these Starks seem to have their abilities sort of catalyzed by the presence of their direwolves. These are magical animals, obviously the symbol of House Stark, and having such a close bond with these creatures from such an early age, not only early age of the children themselves, but of the direwolves. They were found as pups, despite the fact that they're all massive now. And I think that Ned Stark not having any equivalent animal throughout his life and upbringing is likely a factor in him not developing these abilities, as I think it is crucial as to why these abilities have a 100% manifestation rate in the current generation. Of course, Ned Stark is a pigeon. We do need to consider that possibility. Let me know where you think the pigeon might come into the plot in the comments, and while you're down there, leave a like, subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate it. Beyond that, I think people tend to gloss over Ned Stark's childhood and upbringing. He does spend the majority of his childhood away from the North, which is weird to consider. He is our sort of main view on this culture of the North, this worship of the old gods, but if we're actually thinking about his life, he spent more time in his youth and upbringing in the Vale than the North. He was fostered to Jon Arryn at age 8. It was at this point he developed this excellent bromance alliance/romance with Robert Baratheon as they became as close as brothers. And it is interesting because the Vale is known as like the purest area of Andal nobility in the Seven Kingdoms. For those who might not know, the Andals are this other group of people who came to Westeros after the First Men, who are the individuals from which the Starks are descended, who seem to be sort of the progenitors of this skin-changing ability. So it could be an interesting issue of maybe Ned was raised in the shadow of the old gods slightly less than he expects, and he did end up spending less time in the North than he maybe should have as a child. Though with that said, the Stark kids also leave the North in their childhood, but they of course bring their direwolves with them in all cases but Sansa and poor little lady. I think it's also important to take a step back and examine sort of the metatextual history of the series, because if we look at it, this concept of skin changing, of warging, is not fully delved into until A Clash of Kings, by which point, of course, Ned Stark is already dead, not buried, he's in a box somewhere, maybe on Victorian ship in Slaver's Bay, but I digress. Regardless of that, I think this concept is something that Martin very much gets more comfortable with as the series goes on. As mentioned, we don't really get the concrete lore and rules of skin changing until A Clash of Kings, and then more directly in the prologue of A Dance with Dragons. Ned Stark just kind of came before all of that. With that said, I don't think it was a new idea for Martin in A Clash of Kings. The first seed of this series was that scene of the Stark children discovering the direwolves in the snow. I think this magical bond between these kids and their animals was a core tenet of the series from way back at its very inception, before any of this world truly existed. It only grew more fleshed out as time passed on. It's funny because that's also kind of what I view as the biggest weakness of the Ned perspective as a whole, or maybe one of two biggest weaknesses, being that the series didn't really become what it really would be down the line by the time Ned really came into his own as a viewpoint character. I much prefer the chapter style in A Dance with Dragons when compared to A Game of Thrones. A Game of Thrones, I've always said, is like the most impressive book in the series. It is this very tightly constructed plot that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is really excellently paced and set up, and I think he does a great job throughout. But what I really grow to like in the series is this more sprawling world that comes into existence as George R.R. Martin writes it. And I do think that chapter styles in the later series, with each chapter almost being a short story in and of itself and having more focus on kind of the character and the internal monologue, I just really enjoy it, and I do wish we got to experience a Ned in that realm. Though I guess Barristan is kind of a Ned in that realm in certain ways. I also think it makes sense with Martin's writing that certain individuals in families simply are not born with the same gifts as others. Not every Targaryen hatched a dragon, and there are a lot of theories out there as to what exactly it takes to hatch a dragon, or the Targaryen sort of genetic components that allow them to form this bond with dragons. But with that said, it does seem much stronger in some individuals than others, and I would wager that the same is true in the Starks, and maybe Ned just didn't get that gene, though he was able to pass it on to his children. I would guess that Lyanna Stark was a warg, given her kind of proclivity for horse riding and how gifted she is at that, and the fact that her only son, Jon Snow, seems to exhibit this gift quite strongly as well. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and it does really help grow the channel, and it's free. I also have a Patreon, which isn't free, though I guess you can be a free member, but you won't get to watch the videos early. All my videos are available early and ad-free on there. Yeah, leave a like, subscribe. I think I already said those things. I'll have many more videos for you on A Song of Ice and Fire, House of the Dragon, Dunk and Egg, Game of Thrones in the near future, and I'll be going to Comic-Con very soon to cover all of that, and I'll get to see the Dunk and Egg panel and Martin's Spotlight panel as well. So I'm really pumped. I hope you'll join me for those things. Goodbye, everybody.